The Georgia Bulldogs have been arguably the most dominant program in college football over the last few years, and I don't think things are going to change that much going into 2025. Georgia ended up having an early exit in last year's college football playoff, but some of that was due to them losing their star quarterback Carson Beck in the SEC championship game. Georgia has reloaded for 2025, has lots of good players coming back, and a schedule that sets them up for success. In today's video, we're going to preview the 2025 Georgia Bulldogs, go through the roster, who they lost, who they gained, and then make a schedule prediction for them. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's go ahead and get started and talk about the 2025 Georgia Bulldogs. So going into 2024, Georgia was expected to have a good season as they returned their star quarterback Carson Beck. They would face off with number 14 Clemson for the Aflac kickoff game, and what was supposed to be one of the premier games of week 1 ended up being a dud as Georgia won 34-3, and it was never close. After that, they would come back home to Athens and they would destroy Tennessee Tech. They are now 2-0. In week 3, they oddly struggled. Against their former quarterback Brock Vandagriff, Kentucky found a way to almost pull off an upset against the number 1 team in the country, but ultimately Georgia would pull through at the end, winning 13-12. This did show that Georgia had some weaknesses. In one of the most entertaining and ridiculous games of the 2024 college football season, Georgia made a ferocious comeback, and then number 4 Alabama had a late touchdown from their 17-year-old freshman Ryan Williams, and they won 41-34. Georgia now had their first loss of the season. After that, they'd come back home and play in the Deep South's oldest rivalry game against the Auburn Tigers, and they smacked them around 31-13. They are now back to 4-1. After that, they would sort of struggle at home against Mississippi State before then going on the road to number 1 Texas. I honestly did not see this coming, but they went on the road to Austin and won 30-15, and Georgia controlled that game from start to finish. This showed that the Dogs were finding their stride and were back on track, and that would continue with a 14-point win against Florida in early November. They now had 4 games remaining, and they'd have to travel on the road to number 16 Ole Miss. This is one of those games where Carson Beck and Georgia just did not show up, as Ole Miss finally knocked off the Bulldogs, and they won 28-10. Georgia would now have to win out if they wanted to make the college football playoff, and that's exactly what they would do. They faced off at home with number 7 Tennessee, and they would comfortably win 31-17. After that, they'd play against one of the worst teams in the country in UMass, before they face off with their rival Georgia Tech. This game would end up going to overtime, and in one of the most ridiculous games we have ever seen, Georgia would win in 8 overtimes. Thankfully, the entire time we heard the commentating crew talking about how this win could put them in the college football playoff, and there definitely were some controversial moments, but Georgia ended up winning, and then they'd face off with number 2 Texas in a rematch in the SEC title game. Despite Carson Beck getting hurt, Gunnar Stockton would lead them to victory against the number 2 Longhorns, and Georgia clinched their spot in the college football playoff no matter what. They would then face off with number 5 Notre Dame, and this game went about as expected. Gunnar Stockton just was not quite ready for the stage, Notre Dame had gotten hot, and Georgia lost 23-10. Their season was now over, and they went home early. The Bulldogs ended up going 11-3 with a 6-2 record in the conference, and Georgia fans were admittedly a little bit frustrated. Carson Beck took a bit of a step back as he threw for 3,500 yards and 28 touchdowns, but had a career-high 12 interceptions, and also just disappeared in a few matchups. True freshman running back Nate Frazier led the way with 671 yards and 8 touchdowns, and Florida transfer Trevor Etienne also had 600 yards and 9 touchdowns, but he was in and out of trouble and is now off to the NFL. The receiving game was definitely frustrating for Georgia as there was a lot of drops and not a lot of consistency, but Arian Smith led the way with 48 catches for 817 yards and 4 touchdowns. Dom Lovett had 58 catches and 6 touchdowns. Dylan Bell had 43 catches and 4 touchdowns, and then Oscar Delp, Cash Jones, and Lawson Lucky also would make an impact for them. In terms of the defensive side of the ball, Malachi Starks would lead the way with 77 total tackles. Both Jalen Walker and Chaz Chambliss led the way with 6.5 sacks. CJ Allen and Julian Humphrey would have 4 pass deflections apiece, and Dalen Everett led the team with 3 interceptions. Obviously, Georgia had a really good team last year, and they sent plenty of guys off to the 2025 NFL Draft. The Bulldogs would once again have an incredible year, as Mykel Williams would go at pick number 11 to the 49ers, linebacker Jalen Walker would go at pick 15 to the Falcons, and Malachi Starks would go at the 27th overall pick to the Ravens. That was their first round. In the second round, they had They had Tate Ratledge go to the Lions. In the third round, they had Dylan Fairchild and Jared Wilson go to the Bengals and the Patriots. And then they had some skill players get selected. Arian Smith went with pick number 110 to the Jets, and then Trevor Etienne went 4 picks later at number 114 to the Panthers. In the fifth round, Tyrone Ingram-Dawkins went to the Minnesota Vikings. Smail Mondon Jr. went to the Philadelphia Eagles. Warren Brinson went to the Green Bay Packers. Dan Jackson also went to Detroit, and Dom Levitt was their last player selected, as he also went over to Detroit. This was a loaded draft class for Georgia, but luckily they will bring in an influx of young freshman talent, as their recruiting class ranks number 2 in the nation, headlined by 4 5-stars in Elijah Griffin, Isaiah Gibson, Juan Gaston, and Zayden Walker. All 4 of those guys should see the field immediately, and they are loaded from top to bottom with 4-star composite talent. In terms of their transfer portal class, it would rank number 24 in the country, and mostly they just got depth pieces. Walt Claire Flynn Jr. was an interior offensive lineman who transferred from UCF. You got running back Josh McCray as a good second option. You got edge rusher Elo Madozi from Army. Josh Horton came from Miami. Micah Bell came from Vanderbilt. Noah Thomas came from Texas A&M. Adrian Maddox came from UAB. Jaden Harris came from Miami. Zion Branch came from USC, and his brother Zachariah Branch came from USC as well. In my opinion, there are 3 guys that pop off the page for me, and that is Noah Thomas, Zachariah Branch, and Josh McCray. McCray was one of those guys taken in the spring window, and Noah Thomas is a guy who I have thought is NFL for quite some time, but was not properly developed at A&M. And then Zachariah Branch is one of the best athletes at the position that we've seen in the last few years, but his talent was also sort of underutilized at USC. I think all 3 of those guys will play big roles in their offense, but a big question mark for Georgia is going to be who's going to be throwing them the ball. At least it's somewhat of a question mark, but Gunnar Stockton looks like he's going to lead the way, as he's projected to be the first-string quarterback after having an incredible high school career and sitting on the bench for a couple of years. Behind him, you have redshirt freshman Ryan Puglisi, then you have 2 true freshmen in Hezekiah Millender and Ryan Montgomery, but I believe Montgomery is coming off of an injury. This isn't the most loaded quarterback room in Georgia football history, but Stockton should get the job done. At the running back spot, they are absolutely loaded, as true sophomore Nate Frazier will return, and then you got Illinois transfer Josh McCray, as those 2 should be 1 and 2. Then after that, you'll have Roderick Robinson and Cash Jones. Chauncey Bowens, Bo Walker, Dwight Phillips, and Micah Bell also are on the depth chart, but really those first 4 guys are the only ones I expect to get on the field, and they're sort of loaded. In terms of the receiver spot, they will bring back Colby Young, the former Miami transfer, and then you'll also have Noah Thomas backing him up, but I believe Noah will end up starting. Zachariah Branch and Sokovie White will both also get plenty of playing time, and at the Z spot, you'll have Dylan Bell and London Humphreys. And honestly, these guys have a lot of potential, but it's just about one of them emerging. Jeremy Bell, Talon Taylor, Landon Bolden, Cole Spear, and Tyler Williams are also other players that could step up. And at the tight end spot, they return one of the best in the country in Oscar Delp. You also bring back Lawson Lucky, who was productive as a freshman, and then Jaden Riddell, who sat on the bench last year, who might be ready to emerge. As you guys know, for the previews, I don't even try to talk about the defense as there's just so many moving parts, but there are already plenty of huge names for next season, and a lot of draft picks. In terms of their schedule, Georgia will have an interesting first 2 weeks, as their first game will come at home against Marshall. Unfortunately, the Mean Green lost pretty much their entire roster, as Huff ended up leaving for Southern Miss, and Georgia's going to win this game regardless. In week 2, they'll play against Austin Peay, and that game will not be relevant either. In week 3, things definitely get interesting, as they will play on the road against Tennessee. Last year, they ended up beating a top 10 Volunteers team, and the Volunteers just cannot figure out how to beat the Bulldogs. I don't think that will continue this year, as while the game I think will be close, I think Georgia ends up winning on the road in Neyland Stadium and gets their first big win of the year. In week 4, they will once again face off with Alabama, and just like a year ago, this game should be very entertaining. Alabama has a new quarterback in Ty Simpson, and this game will say a lot about where both of these programs are. Ultimately, I think top to bottom, Georgia is the better team, and they will win at home against Alabama, probably by about 7 to 10 points. They are now 4-0. Unfortunately for Wildcats fans, I do not think the Kentucky game will be as close as it was last year, as I think last year was just sort of a fluke. I think Georgia will have found their stride, and this is an early noon game, so I think Georgia ends up going up by a lot at halftime and wins it comfortably, 5-0. After that, they will play against their rival Auburn, and this is somewhat of a trap game. A couple of years ago, Auburn almost knocked off the Bulldogs before Brock Bowers took over, and Hugh Freeze is in winner-go-home mode, so I think Auburn will give Georgia their best shot, but ultimately I'm not going to pick against the Bulldogs, as I think Georgia wins this game on the road and gets to 6-0 for the first half of the season. That's sort of what everybody expects. After that, they will come back home and play against Ole Miss, and after losing to the Rebels last year, I do not think it'll happen again. While Georgia did get a small glimpse of Austin Simmons last season when he filled in for Dart, Simmons will now be the main starter for Ole Miss, but they lost their top 3 receivers, and I think it's going to be quite difficult for Ole Miss to win this game, especially with it being on the road. Georgia goes to 7-0. Honestly, this will probably be the best Georgia-Florida game we have seen since 2020, as the Gators now have a lot of hype, as they return a ton of good freshmen from last year, a good young quarterback in DJ Lagway, and it seems like Billy Napier is slowly starting to figure things out, as they got hot at the end of the 2024 season. Even though this game is neutral site, I think Georgia is the better team, and I'm not fully bought into the Florida hype just yet, so Georgia cruises to 8-0. From there, they then travel on the road to play against Mississippi State, and as you guys remember, for some reason Mississippi State hung around in that game in Athens last year, but I don't necessarily know if it's going to happen again. I don't have a lot of faith in Blake Shapen, and Mississippi State is probably the worst team in the SEC this year, so despite it being on the road, I think Georgia also wins. After that, they will come back home and play against Texas. Georgia went 2-0 against the Longhorns last year, which was honestly unexpected, and I think it'll get to 3-0. I know a lot of people think I'm a Texas hater, but I do think the Longhorns are going to fall off a little bit this year. This is nothing against Texas, as I think they're extremely good, but they just lost a lot from last season, and they haven't yet fully proven to me that they can totally reload. A lot of this will also depend on how good Arch Manning is, but I think Georgia wins this game. After that, instead of playing an FCS team, they will play against Charlotte in the second to last weekend, which will be a win, and then they face off with Georgia Tech. This is definitely one of the more intriguing games on their schedule, as a lot of people think Georgia Tech could be at the top of the ACC, and last year's game is definitely a lot of fuel to the fire for the Yellow Jackets team. It's extremely tough to beat Brent Key, and with this game being at a neutral site, it could be interesting. I think Georgia Tech will definitely hang around, but I think Georgia ultimately closes it off. I know you guys might give me flack for going all chalk here, but there's really not a game on this schedule that I think Georgia definitively loses. Tennessee, Alabama, Florida, Texas, and Georgia Tech should be challenging, but I don't really have a reason to pick any of those 5 teams to win. Georgia is the most talented team in college football and has proved time and time again that they don't lose much, especially in the last few years. I think Georgia ends up winning the SEC this year and ends up as a top 4 seed in the college football playoff. From there, it would depend on matchups, but I could easily see them going all the way to the national championship, as this year my favorite team is Penn State, and I could see the Bulldogs and Nittany Lions facing off there. We'll just have to wait and see, but a lot of this will be based on how good Gunnar Stockton is and if the receivers can step up. Everything else will be fine for them, and the schedule definitely aids them. But what do you guys think? If you're a Georgia fan, what did I get right and wrong? What will be the trickiest team? And what other information about this year's Georgia squad do I need to know? Be sure to let me know down below, leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out one of the videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.